To create my cake topper, I've used some inbuilt patterns in my machine. So always check to see what patterns you have in your machine. I'm using the SDX 2200D. You may have the same patterns, you may not, depending on which model you have. If you haven't got the files I'm going to show you, don't panic. Just go to Google and you'll be able to search and find similar patterns and save them and transfer them to Canvas Workspace to use. So I'm going to go to pattern. I'm going to select this folder here with the Eiffel Tower, and in the third row down I'm going to select this folder with the rocking horse. I'm going to scroll down and there's the cake I've used, pattern AR1046. So I'm going to tap that and say OK. Now we have a couple of options. We can either set each part of the cake onto the mat individually, or select all parts of the cake and set them onto the mat all at once. So to save time, I'm going to save all parts onto the mat and say OK, and I'm going to ungroup them before I set them onto the mat and say set. I'm going to add pattern again, and now we're going to add the numbered candles that I used in my cake topper, and these are found in the applique section. So in the third folder along, you'll see we have our numbered candles. So I'm going to select a number and say OK. And again, rather than selecting each piece individually, which would take ages, I'm going to select a number and select all pieces and say OK, ungroup them and set them onto the mat. If I want another number, I'm just going to do the same process. So pattern, applique, select another number, select all pieces, ungroup them and set them onto the mat. Now I want to save these into Canvas Workspace so I can work with them. So I'm going to go to save to Canvas Workspace, and when that's done, all the files will be ready and waiting for me in Canvas Workspace. The font I'm using in today's video is called Milkshake, and I want to show you how to find and install a font. So I've typed Milkshake font into Google and I'm going to click on the site to download it. Before I download any font, I'm going to check the license. So here's the license agreement, and you will see for digital end products, I can use this for unlimited projects. Physical end products, yes, I can use that for unlimited projects, and print on demand is the same. So I can safely use this font without breaching anyone's copyright. So let's install the font by double clicking on download zip. And I don't even have to extract the font. I just left click on it and click install. And I'm going to pretend I haven't installed it yet and just say yes. So the next time we open Canvas Workspace and select our text tool, if we scroll down, our Milkshake font becomes available for us to use. We're now going to bring in the files that we've sent across from our Scanncut. To do this, we're going to go to File, Import from Cutting Machine and select FCM image. Now we don't need the candles from the original cake. So on the right hand side you'll see the layers panel, which looks like a stack of papers. So left click there, select the original candles and simply hit delete. So let's move the candles off the screen. So I'm left clicking and dragging over the candles to select them. I'm going to go to layer and group and move them to one side. Now we're going to start creating a background for the elements of our cake topper to sit on. So I'm going to again left click and drag until all the elements of my cake are selected. I'm going to go to layer and group. So you can make your finished cake topper any size you like, but for my cake topper I worked out that I want my cake element to be 4.5 inches tall. So I'm going to go to the right hand side and select edit and change the height to 4.5 inches and hit enter. I'm going to go to layer and duplicate and move a copy off to one side so I have some extra files to work with. So left click on your cake to select it, and let's start creating our back layer. So with our cake selected, I'm going to go to offset in the edit menu, and the spacing is fine. 0.2 inches is about 5 millimeters. Yes, I want an outward offset with a round corner, but I'm going to select my original line to delete and say OK. So I'm going to left click and drag over all those offsets I've just created. Go to the right hand menu and select weld. So now we need to do the same thing with our candles. So I'm going to click on my candles, go to layer and duplicate, and bring one set onto the mat. I'm going to go to layer and ungroup, and I don't need my number 5, so I'm going to delete that for now. I'm going to select all the elements of my remaining candle, go to layer and group. So I want the candle on my finished topper to be 2.25 inches high. So again, with my candle selected in the edit menu, I'm going to change this to 2.25 inches in height. I'm going to go to layer and duplicate, make a copy of my candle and move that off to one side. Reselect my original candle, scroll back down in the edit menu, select offset, and we're going to leave everything as is and say OK. So you notice that creating this offset has given us an extra shape in the middle of our candle, but there's no need to worry about that. We're just going to left click and drag over both our elements, go to process overlap and weld. So now let's join our candle offset with our cake offset. So I'm going to left click and drag to select both offsets, go to the align menu and align everything in the center. I can now simply hit my down arrow to accurately overlap my candle offset with my cake offset. So let's join both of those together by selecting them and hitting weld. I'm going to go to the brush icon, which is properties, and under colour I'm just going to select this a silvery grey, just so we can see it a little more clearly. So let's bring our cake onto the mat, and once again go to layer and duplicate that just in case we make a mistake. Now the joy of working with Canvas Workspace for PC is that I don't have to ungroup my cake to work with the individual elements. I can simply go to the layers panel on the right hand side, choose any element and work with them individually. So I want to create an extra layer of hearts to go on top of my cake. So in the layers panel, I'm going to find the hearts and click on them to select them. I'm going to go to the edit panel, scroll down to offset, and let's create a offset with a spacing of 0.08 inwards, but this time we want to leave our original line and say OK. So now we have an extra layer of hearts to decorate our cake with. So I'm going to go to the layers panel once again, and we're going to start colouring our image so we can get an idea of how the finished project will look. And there is a reason why I'm going to colour this in. You don't have to do it in order to cut it, but there is a technique I want to show you at a later date. So let's find our plate first of all. And if we go up to properties at the top, under fill, we can change the colour. So let's change this to a nice blue and say OK. So we're going to go back to layers. We're going to find the sponge for our cake, go back up to properties, and we're going to fill this with colour and say OK. So we're just going to carry on like this. We're going to select our icing, go to properties, and I want my icing to be white. So I'm going to say OK. Go back to layers, and here's our chocolate topping. So under properties, let's choose a nice chocolate colour. Go back to layers. Let's find the outline for our large hearts. And I think I'll colour this in a light pink. I'm going to find the small hearts now and colour those in a darker pink. So you can really start to get an idea now of how our finished cake topper is going to look. So let's bring our candle onto the mat, and we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to find our candle in the layers panel and start colouring it in. So now I'm selecting the outer flame, and I'm going to colour that orange. Choose the inner flame and turn that yellow and say OK. I'm going to just left click and drag over my cake and my heart offset. I'm going to go to layer and group. So this doesn't matter for cutting purposes, but as I said before, there is another technique I want to show you. So that's why we're doing this process. Okay, so if we move our candle over our cake topper, I think we can jazz this up a little bit more by creating some more offsets for our candle. So I'm going to go back to the layers panel. I'm going to select my number 1, go back to edit, select offset, and I'm going to choose an offset of 0.08 inches, and I'm going to choose my direction to be outwards, leave my original line as is, and say OK. So in the layers panel, I'm going to select my new offset, and let's colour it in to see how it looks. So I'm going to turn that pink. And you'll notice that we can no longer see our blue number 1. So if we go to our layers panel, I'm going to explain the reason for that. So you can think of the layers panel a bit like a deck of cards. So we're going to shuffle our shapes into position until we can see them. So I'm simply selecting my pink number 1 and dragging it down to just underneath my blue number 1. And you can see that that offset now becomes visible. And this doesn't matter for cutting purposes, but as I said, I want to show you another technique later on. So this is why I'm showing you how to colour and layer your images. So I think we can probably create another offset for our number 1. So I'm going to select the offset that we've just created, which is our largest offset, and we're going to go back to our edit menu and let's choose another offset, and this time bring the spacing down to 0.04 inches. Leave everything as it was before and say OK. Let's go to our properties panel and let's colour that in maybe a, I don't know, maybe a dark grey, just so we can see it. And go back to our layers panel and just drag that offset into position. Now I'm going to select my flames in the layers panel, and I'm just going to move them up a little bit and click off, and that looks better. Okay, so I'm not very happy with the grey of my outer offset, so I'm going to change that to a nicer colour, and maybe I'll change that to green. And I'm just going to select the group for my candle and just move that off so it's a little more central, and that looks great. So we've nearly finished now, so we just need to create our text. So I'm going to choose the text icon and make sure that milkshake is selected and type in our name. So I'm going to type in Makers. And I'm going to go back to the duplicate of the cake we created earlier, and I'm going to ungroup it. And I'm just going to drag on the plate. So now we're going to have a bit of fun with the fit text to path function. We're going to make our text curve around our cake rather than just sitting flat on our cake. So I'm going to click and drag over both our text and our oval to select it, and we're going to go to edit and fit to path. We're going to go to the properties icon on the top right hand side, and if we look at the bottom right, our text to path options now become available. So I'm going to leave our horizontal alignment left, but I'm going to change the vertical alignment to middle and the path direction to end to start. I'm going to left click on the crosshair and drag our text round. I'm going to go to edit and convert to shapes. I can now go to edit, process overlap and weld. So let's fill that with colour as we did before. And say OK. And lastly, we're going to create an offset for our text. So we're going to go to our edit panel, scroll down to offset, and I'm going to increase the spacing to 0.08 inches outwards. Leave everything else as is and say OK. So now let's colour in our offset. And again in our layers panel, shuffle that down in our deck of cards. So I'm going to select those and group them and move them onto our cake. And I think this would look better a bit smaller, so I'm just going to shrink that in slightly. And in fact, what I'm going to do is group my heart decorations, and I'm going to make those a little smaller and move them up, and then I can select my text and I can make that bigger. And I think what I'm going to do is find our background layer for our cake, and I'm going to change the colour of that to, let's try pink and see how that looks. And yet I'm happy with that, so I'm going to left click and select everything, and this is the last trick I'm going to show you. We're going to change our line colour to transparent. Okay, so there's our finished cake topper, and it's fully coloured in. So let's move that down and out of the way slightly and group that. So now I want to show you how to create an offset when you have 2 candles or maybe even more onto the mat. So maybe if someone's 100, for example. So let's duplicate the candles again and move them off to one side. So with our double candle selected, I'm going to go to the edit menu and create an offset. And we created our original offset to 0.20 inches, and we deleted off our original line. So we would just left click and drag to select both our offsets and select weld. Now you'll notice that this isn't perfect. We have this ugly sort of layer here, and this could leave the back of our card topper a little floppy. So I want to show you how to deal with that. So let's bring on a shape from our basic shapes, and let's bring on a circle. Now I'm going to shrink my circle down, and I'm just going to move that so it fits over the area that I want to get rid of. So I don't want to have this cut out area here. So I'm going to select both of those and go to weld, and then I could easily join this onto my cake offset as we did at the start of the process, and then our double or triple candles will just fit over the top of that offset. So I'm just deleting off all the files that I don't need. So we're going to save our file in 2 formats. So we're going to firstly go to File, Save As, and we're going to save it as a Canvas Workspace project file. So I'm going to call this First Birthday Topper and say Save. And doing that will save all the original colours of our topper when we bring this back on the screen. So now let's export this to our machine. So File, Export Transfer FCM File. So before I send this to my machine, I'm going to go to Layer and Ungroup. I'm going to go to my Layers panel and just make sure every group is ungrouped, because we can't ungroup group files at the machine. So now I've done that, and I'm just going to export transfer my FCM file. So I'm going to transfer it wirelessly over the internet, or you could also save it onto a USB and transfer it onto your Scanncut that way.